Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Leadership Water Cooler. Jonathan Risto here. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Truly appreciate you taking the time. Now, what we were going to be talking about today, last week or last month, remember I gave you that little bit of homework saying you need to figure out your business? Well, today we're going to dive deeper into that to try and understand why these things like priorities and visions and corporate strategies all matter. And I have with me today a guest that you are going to absolutely love to have on here and talk to and listen to. His name is Dutch Schwartz. I know Dutch is leading expert in way too many things probably to list off. He's been involved. He's been in the military. He's working and doing cloud strategy stuff, major advisor to CISOs and others. And he's here with us today. So first of all, I want to say thank you, Dutch, for taking the time to be part of this today with us. Truly appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, no, thanks for the invite. And I'm thrilled to be on.
Well, as I said just a moment ago, what we were wanting to do here, take part in, is understand really this thing about the business world. It's like, why should we even care about this as part of security? Like these, as I said, the strategies, the visions, and how do we start to plug into this? And why is it really important to us? And I know you and I have had a lot of good conversations on this in the past, but just want to get a take. Can you help everyone that's really on here and go, hey, why does this really matter to this? Why should I care as a security leader?
Sure.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think context is important, right? It's helpful to sort of look at how did we get to the point we're at today, right?
Yeah.
And without overselling it, we're at a bit of an inflection point. And really, if you look sort of the timeline, right? The first acknowledged CISO was in 1994. So our domain, while it feels, like we're 25, 30 years in, it's younger relative to the other domains. And so what does that mean? Well, we really started, generally speaking, under IT as a cost center, reporting up through the IT department to the CIO or the CTO, depending on your structure. And what's happened is, as digital transformation has occurred, that's changed the importance of digital assets, I'll call it, right? And so if we think of things like big data, analytics, the cloud, et cetera, that movement towards digital transformation really changes where does the value lie inside of an organization. And because of that change, then the importance of security has increased. And so we're in this inflection point where, if we look at the new literature, kind of the new thought leaders, we're really talking about how do we enable the business, but that's kind of the catchphrase that we've been talking about for about 2 years. And so now we have to kind of put some meat on those bones. Like, what does that really mean, right? So if we've come from a security expertise, a domain background, and we spent a lot of valuable time learning about vulnerabilities or being pen testers or whatever that background was, or working in the SOC, super useful to be grounded in that and understand. But as you move to leadership roles, you have to start to transition to what is the business of the business. I'm not being flippant, but like, you really have to understand. And it's not just shareholder value, increase revenue, decrease costs. Those are like table stakes. It's sort of like saying a vehicle has to drive down a road, right? Those are a given. But you have to understand, like, my particular business in my space with my customers, what is it that we're doing? And so you threw out some things at the beginning, and just to kind of clarify those, we start with, the vision, right? So where are we headed, right? And that's generally the founders of the company, the leaders of the company. Where are we heading? And people need to understand that. And then we get to the mission, and that's our why. Why are we doing what we do, right? And it's really kind of been overlooked, frankly, in the civilian space in the last 20 years or so. But really, it's important because people need to intrinsically buy into and care about, why are we doing these things, right? And then we get to the strategy piece, and that's the broad brushstrokes of how are we going to do those things? And then we get down to the what, right? And that's the tactics on a day-to-day basis. What are we doing to tie all those things together? And Steve Katz, who's that first CISO I mentioned in 1994, he's mentioned that from technical domain expertise, we're really good at talking about the what. We talk about the what a lot. And sometimes we talk about the how, but we rarely talk about the why. And so we really need to reverse that and start with, why are we doing this? What's the business doing? And how do my activities then tie into that?
Yeah, I totally agree. We're really good at the technical gobbledygook, I like to call it. But how do we take that and actually do something with it? Because that's where we live. That's where we breathe. That's where, like you said, that's where we've grown up. And that's the comfort zone for us. And trying to push a little bit out of that almost is what we have to start to do. But yeah, I like that background and the context on that. That's great to help people understand what was going on. But for us, really, I've been finding that as you said, we're really good at that technical conversation, but even when we're trying and talking to the senior leaderships, we're not doing a good job of putting it into terms that they even understand. Like we're horrible, quite frankly. Well, sorry, that's a broad brush there. That's a little bit too much. There's a lot of us that are really bad at stepping away from the technical, the jargon and all of that stuff. And how can we actually communicate with those outside of the technical domain? Like, sure, we can talk to our CISO. They'll understand what's going on if you're anywhere inside the security realm. But as we're going up and moving along, like I've got to talk with, oh my goodness, finance. I've got to talk with marketing. I have to talk with, oh my goodness, the rest of the business leadership. And that's not their background. And it's a major challenge for us here.
Yeah, and I think so. If you're, new to being a, senior executive, senior security leader, or you're aspiring, right? This is that opportunity to take and really kind of dig into that, right? So there's some really simple things that you can do to ground yourself in the business. And you and I talked about some of these, and and so I want to share some of those resources, right? So I'll sort of frame it if you're a public company based in the United States, just because that's kind of the cleanest framing. But you'll find that there's analogous pieces of this, whether you're in Europe or Asia, and I'll let you speak to Canada, of course, right? So, but let's just say that you're welcome. That we're a public company in the United States, right? So if you're a public company and you're publicly traded in the United States, right, you have some requirements, and luckily, then as if you're trying to learn and get grounded, those are available to you, right? So the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, requires you as a publicly traded company to publish a 10K. That's the nickname for it. And then an annual report. And we use those terms like as if they're exactly the same. They're actually not technically the same, right? So the 10K is the required documentation. It is a little more black and white. It's really just text for the most part. That's what you're going to find in the SEC Edgar database. So if you want to search any company, you're going to find that. And it won't be as friendly, to a non-finance person if your background's not in investments or finance. The annual report, however, the intention is that it's written for the shareholders, the average person, if you will, right? So the annual report is often more human readable. It will be glossy. It will have the pretty charts. It will have the more, kind of easy to read language. So you may want to start with the annual report. So what you're looking for there is section 1 will cover the business. And as silly as that sounds, you should go read that if you've never read it. And it'll talk to you about what are maybe you have 4 or 5 different parts of the business, right? Or geographies or customer spaces or what have you. And there'll be a discussion around, well, how does the business really exist and drive and generate revenue and interact with its customers? Yeah. And then section 1A, specifically, you're required to list what your risks are. All of the risks, not just cybersecurity, but all the risks. And that's a great place to ground yourself because it will give you a sense of where's the board, the CEO, and the executive team, where do they think our risks are? And that's where you can then pull that thread and say, oh, okay, what's my piece here as a cybersecurity leader? How do I then support that risk? And then you could skip to section 7 if you're looking at 10K, and that's the management discussion and analysis. That's a great place to go skip to. They'll talk through, here's where we see the market headed. Here's what we see competition doing. Here's how we're going to respond to that. Here's our intention around where we're headed. So those are some places, and I'll just kind of pause there and get your thoughts on how you see those.
No, I agree that like from the US based perspective, the 10K is great. I went and pulled up a couple of them this morning, just picked a couple public companies that were out there and just looked, and like the first thing you see is that brief description, but then it's like section 1A, risks.
Right.
And yes, all of them have something related to a cybersecurity breaches, data loss, etc. And that is really a table stake things I find. That's not where we want to look. It's looking at what other risks I see that are identified or highlighted in there that are really get insightful. Because a breach may cause us problems, data loss of our
that's a given.
Like that kind of stuff. Yeah. We know that. And I think everyone has that in there in some flavor. But I agree with what you said. It's looking and seeing what the leaders have to say about it. And I like your other point with the 10K, with what is it, Section 7, or even just the annual report describing the business. Even go to your company website, like About Us, and see the general info that's in there to start with. You start to see all the divisions and stuff and how they're starting to play together, and the management conversation around it that comes later in the annual reports or inside the 10K. I fully agree with you. It's getting their take on the business and how that actually needs to be articulated. And with the annual reports, that's a lot easier to digest.
Right.
Like you said, it's written for the masses compared to, let's maybe read this when we're having insomnia from a 10K sometimes on some of them. Like, they're not that bad, but it's
right. It's pretty dry language.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there's a couple of other places that you can go that are, again, kind of friendlier and human readable. You're not required to, but most companies will publish a letter to shareholders, right? So like Warren Buffett, of course, is famous for this. But letters to shareholders is a great place because it will be a redacted kind of typically it's only 1 to 2 pages. Yeah. And what I've seen with customers and entities that I've worked with in the past, that sometimes gives you a really good snapshot. I've seen in the retail space where in a letter to shareholders, they'll say, here's our 3 focus areas for the year. Bingo. Aha.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really helpful to you as a security leader to look at those 3 focus areas and then go talk to your peers. To your point, the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Revenue Officer, the lines of business say, hey, now that we're aligning in this, let me give you something concrete. So one that I worked on last year was customer experience. Having a great customer experience was one of their 3 focus areas. Okay. That's phenomenal. Now, what does that mean to you as the security leader, right? So CISO, deputy CISO, all the directors on, and so forth. And what that means is rather than start from the tech, to your point that we're comfortable with, like in this case, we were looking at, doesn't matter, but I'll just pick a technology. I'll say web application firewall as an example. Yeah. Rather than start there and then build our way up, because that CFO is not going to know what OAF is, right? You start the other direction, right? And you say, hey, look, one of our 3 focus areas this year is world-class customer experience. And then we did a tree on a whiteboard and we said, well, what are the things that would interrupt world-class customer experience? And let's say that we're a retail customer. And so individual consumers use our website or our market site. Well, if you had a DDoS incident, that would then interrupt that customer experience. So that's a great way to then but start at the top. Right? What's the business initiative, the focus, and then bring that down to the tech. And then your workflow and everything you're doing around that particular technology, it's great, but now it's tied to something. So now if you're talking to the CFO or the CRO or the CMO, it's a different discussion. Hey, the reason I have this workflow, this is an area of improvement for us, and we're doing X, Y, Z, and all the details that you already have, but you framed it completely differently. Now it's about how do we give them world-class customer experience. And we're doing something, Net Promoter Score, CSAT scores, that's how we're tracking it. And my piece of that is ensuring CIA, or whatever, however you want to frame it, based on your approach.
No, I like that example that you gave there with the whiteboarding, because I think it's also something concrete any of us are going to be able to do. Like, you don't have to be the frontline manager. You don't have to be the CISO to be able to be the only one doing this. We can do it for any part of the business. And I'm curious if you're seeing it more for the people that you talk with as well, with regards to, are you seeing the leaders actually taking that and trying to work with their teams to help educate the teams in that context? Or are they just using it and leveraging it to the outside? So it's just like, as we're talking to the CMOs, the CFOs, and other leaders, I'm just curious, because I think that's a great opportunity for us as security leaders to help our teams understand, while at the same time being able to pivot and talk to the other parts of the organization.
Yeah, I'm starting to see that sort of the CISO -1 and 2, right? Just as a nickname, I would call it, right? So I'm starting to see at that director level, where they're starting to get that information, right, from the deputy CISO or the CDIO or whomever they report to. So I think that's kind of the level I see it today. Is a lot of, now we're having director level conversations, which is good. And there's a trend where I'm seeing leadership or executive leaders encouraging, when they're at that manager or director level, to start to make those connections. right? Start working with your peers in those other groups today, not just your AppSec peer, your IT peers, but the other peers, right? HR, legal, finance, revenue, whatever revenue generation, peers that you have. And so that's really critical. After our discussion last time, I went and scrolled through some documents as well. And I found a great example. Another place that you can look is there's often an investor briefing, right? So you come out with your earnings report on a quarterly basis, right? And you should certainly listen to the earnings report and ask questions. And if it's not your forte, you should say, hey, so our insert thing here, revenue, margin, whatever came out in the earnings report, you should ask questions around that from your peers or your manager, depending on where you are in the organization. But here's a good example. I read an earnings report from a public company this morning, and for the next 3 years, they're really focused on increasing their cash flow to be cash flow positive. So you're like, so that's like the opposite of our technical gobbledygook. You're like, what is cash flow positive? What does that mean? Right? Okay. And there's great resources, and we can drop some of those in on what that means. But what you should then, cash flow, CapEx, right? Not, OpEx. Exactly. I mean, there's now an obvious discussion if you're talking about budgeting around, well, what does that mean to me from a headcount standpoint, from a training standpoint? Does this mean I'm going to be more constrained? Am I allowed to take more risks to try to drive that? So that's why you need to look through, there's 3 financial statements, right? So balance sheet, income statement, cash flow. Normally, I wouldn't necessarily look at the cash flow really closely, depending on your industry. But if your executive team or your board is saying, we're trying to drive cash flow, then you're going to you need to read that statement and understand the implications, because it's going to impact you as somebody who manages a budget and manages a team of people.
Yeah, I agree. It's understanding, as I phrase it, that technical gobbledygook, but it's the business side of the house, how understanding the terms that they're using as well. And I guess that's also is an interesting point, because I'm sure there's some people that are thinking, okay, do I have to go get an MBA to be able to survive in the world out here? Like, oh my goodness. Yeah, it would help, but you don't even have to do that. It's understanding business terms. And as Dutch said, it was, how do you actually talking with your peers and going out and learning about the business. You don't have to be the CISO talking to the CMO, the revenue, and the executives and others. You can do that at our level. Like, you're the frontline manager. Find someone who's in marketing that develop the relationships and talk with them, or in finance, or in any part of the business.
Right.
And then it's also a source that we're going to be able to go to and actually ask those questions. Let alone, like you said, leadership, but even some of those individuals are going to continue to advance as well. So as we continue to advance our careers, we're going to continue to have the resources. As we move companies, we can still talk to them. Or as we move up internally, we're going to have resources to draw on. Because I'd be quite frankly afraid to go and talk to the CFO all the time. If I'm the frontline manager, it's like, ooh, I'm not going to get in the door.
And there's great resources today too, to start yourself down that path, right? So you're right. You don't have to have an MBA or even an executive MBA, right? So the new materials that are coming out in the CISO community and the security community are starting to touch on that, right? Are talking about, hey, how do you read a financial statement? There's great learning. Actually, the SEC website itself walks you through how financial statements work, and it's really written at a straightforward level, right? So what I found to be helpful, Jonathan, when I'm working with that, deputy CISO, director, manager folks, is to reframe the question, right? So let's say that you approach me, you say, I have a project and it is for insert technology, or let's just say, I'll pick CASB as an example. I have a project for CASB. Great. So my next question to try to help coach you is why? Not like sarcastically, but why are we doing that, right? And so what I find is if there's not kind of an immediate answer beyond the technical, what we're trying to accomplish, then I have 5 business initiatives that most companies, 1 or 2 of these will be the ones that are really tying to those. And so I'll just write them on a napkin or a whiteboard, and then we'll figure out which one of those is. So those initiatives are speed to market, increase innovation, improve customer experience, reduce friction, and develop flexibility. And so as an example, when I've had these discussions, then I try to map that to one of those 5 initiatives. And then often it clicks, right? Sometimes I've been approached, and I remember having a discussion around firewall rules and trying to do scripting, because they were making so many changes around firewall rules. And of course, my question was, why is that, right? And so we got in this really deep dive discussion, about about scripting, and that was cool for like an hour. And then I'm like, okay, let's pull this back up. So why is this happening? Like, it must be tying to something. And I rattled off the 5 initiatives, and the folks in the room, we really didn't land on anything. So let me ask this a different way. And these were directors.
Mm-hmm.
What does your boss's boss care about? Boom, light bulb went on. Oh, it's about increasing innovation. And because of that, we're collaborating with more small third-party entities to do innovation. I'm like, great, let's pull the thread on that. What does that mean to you? Well, that's why I have to poke all these holes in the firewall rules, is to give people essentially temporary, access to resources. And I said, okay, cool. So we're gonna work on the scripting of the firewall rules, and we'll try to figure out some middleware and some way to fix that. So, but that's a tactical, technical issue. What I hear you saying is you really have an ephemeral trust issue, right? But it's really being driven by the fact that you want to do more innovation. So when you're talking to your boss and your boss's boss or your peers, we should be talking about innovation. Hey, Jonathan, who's in my seat, in a different department, the reason that we need to make some changes here is because now we're trying to drive new innovation. To support that, to enable that innovation, we need to do these 2 or 3 things. That's a very different conversation than me telling you no and telling you need to fill out a form and then wait for 3 days, which is what was happening, when I started to kind of whiteboard this out with this particular entity. Does that, what I mean?
Yeah, no, it is. I love those forms too. I've had many of those in my career. But I like what you're saying though, with the ensuring that we're at least, even if it's as simple for tying back to the strategic initiatives we've read about in the business, be it in the annual report or wherever it is, the internal documentation, even or the town hall type things. Mm-hmm. But it's getting and tying back to that, so we can ensure it, because at least then the reason, what's the driver for this, as opposed to, I need to do something here. Great, the technical, and we can do the technical, but how does that relate to the business? Because that's outside of security, outside of IT. Yes, people understand technology is there, but showing how that ties in, linking the two together shows the importance, or how it's at least supporting corporately what we are trying to accomplish. And pardon me, the challenge I see sometimes myself is, if we're not tying to that, we end up shut down, and it ends up being a liability because we didn't do it, but it's not because it wasn't needed. It's because we couldn't articulate it. It's like you said, the cash flow. Okay, we just can't spend that $1 million to do this initiative, because they don't see the value of it. Where at least if we're articulating it into the business strategy direction and what are the importance for the business, they can at least say, okay, this is how this ties together, instead of forcing them in essence to try and make the correlation between the two of them. I'm not saying our directors, our senior executives and the leadership need it, but it's for us to make it easy to connect the dots together for everybody. Right. We need to try and do this, but showing others how it goes in. Our leaders are busy. They don't need to try and sit there. Oh, I wonder what Jonathan's trying to do today. This is what it is. This is what, right. If they're doing that, I have serious issues going on.
Yeah.
But it's showing and make it easy for the decision, enable it, put it together, have the information available to them so they can actually make the decision we need to have done, or take it to where it needs to go. But it's all there, the complete package, and more than just my technical gobbledygook.
Right. And so the connecting the dots that you just mentioned, that's the key to a good strategy. You know that your strategy is working correctly if it aligns teams and resources. That's the key to a good strategy. It gives you just enough alignment so that each person then can do the tactics for their area. And that's the language then that you have to use. And again, we didn't kind of go into sort of the financial language, but different organizations, whether they're a government, a nonprofit, or public facing, they'll have, key metrics, right? And that's the other thing that you should get familiar with, right? I worked at companies that it was return on working capital. Sometimes it's return on equity. Others it's ROIC. It could be net present. There's a variety, right? And again, you don't have to sort of be an expert on all of those different things, but you do need to understand, like, what are we focusing on, right? Is it time to revenue? And again, if you ask those 5 general ones that I mentioned, that'll get you into the right alignment, right? Yeah. And that way, when you're talking to somebody else, you say, hey, how we're really focused on speed to market, Okay, awesome. But I have to put some guardrails in, not to slow you down, but because we think mostly about risk mitigation, right, and risk reduction, but that is not a jazzy thing to talk about with a lot of the other teams, right? But that's intrinsically part of what we do, right?
It is, yes, totally.
We've got to talk it. We got to switch the dialogue to business enablement. How does this help you enable the business, right? I know because I'm now in tune, right? You start talking that language. Hey, I know we're really focused on time to revenue or speed to market, right? And so I'm all in, right? I'm aligned to that. To do that successfully, I have a couple questions. I want to make sure I understand. Here are the risks, and so it's a totally different conversation because now it's an enablement discussion. How do I enable you to do the things that you want to do, right? But you get my pieces to do the risk mitigation, right? I mean, so it's almost like an aside, right? But don't lead with that. That should not be the opener. The opener should be, hey, we have these three big things, right, Jonathan? Okay, cool. And I think we're talking about this one, right? This new piece of insert thing here, this new piece of software, this new enterprise software that you want to do. That's awesome. I get why that's going to give us reduced friction, right? So you go back to one of those five. Now, I want to make sure that we're successful in that. So let me ask a couple questions about, application security, supply chain, whatever your questions are. But it's just the framing of that is completely different. And then to your point, make sure that you're telling your teams, your people, here's why we're doing it. I know you really care about that tactical thing. Here's how this ties together.
Yeah, no, I agree with your comment. Don't lead with the risk, because if we're in the room going, I want to talk to you about it, it starts to get that glossy-eyed. It's like, well, I'm tuned out. I'm on my phone already trying to answer and do with the stuff that I have in the local. It's like going into a meeting and saying, okay, I want to know what metrics you'd like to see. Oh my goodness, run for the doors.
That stuff it goes in an appendix. That goes in the back. You have that stuff because it's what sort of our stock and trade, right? We use that, right? So I talked about vulnerability matrices, right, this morning, right? I mean, that's stuff that we care about and our people care about, and it's absolutely core critical thing to do. But that is not a discussion point with a different department, right? In the same way that they would, we would arguably be bored if our finance peers like, hey, let me tell you about Sarbanes-Oxley for about an hour. I mean, I've sat through those trainings because it's not our interest and it's not our forte, and that's okay. But if they're good at it, they say, hey, let me tell you, I had a great finance officer at one point, and he's like, hey, I'm here. At the time I was running a P&L. He's like, hey, I'm here to help you take risk. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that was a great discussion because I had always felt like they just told me no, right? For headcount, for initiatives, for training. He's like, I'm here to help you take risk in a positive way. And again, he was a CFO, and that was a great discussion because now it helped me go, okay, well, what's an appropriate amount of risk? Well, it's this for shrinkage. It's this for, it was a very different discussion. And he didn't come in and say, let me tell you what your net effective rate needs to be. And, he didn't kill me with all these very heavy finance metrics. So then it was approachable, and then we could whiteboard. But he was like, hey, my job is to help you take risk. Our job is the same, right? In security, it's to help people take a reasonable amount of risk. We don't set those limits. Those limits come from the board and from the executives. We're there to advise. We're there to mitigate. We're there to communicate, and we're there to be resilient and respond if such risk occurs, right? But we've got to be flexible and say we're in service to the business. And so you really got to rethink how is what I do help the business in one of those key areas.
Yeah, agreed. And it ultimately comes down to having good collaboration, I find, with the individuals inside the organization. So if like you said, you're leading off and having that conversation about, oh, we need to worry about the risk. Yeah, it doesn't. How do we help enable you to do what you're trying to do, bringing security's expertise to bear? How do we help the organization move forward? Totally changes the conversation. Like you said, with the financial executive who came up, I'm here to help you deliver on what you need, but here's my expertise and be able to support you on that.
Right.
Much better collaborative environment. And that's ultimately what we need to do better, quite frankly, I would argue, with insecurity and in organizations in general. But yeah, it's getting to that point, trying to bring it forward for everybody and the company ultimately to be able to succeed, to drive those the priorities that have been outlined or the project that's coming forward. Otherwise, I like calling it, we've fully embraced cloud technology and security because we're known as the NAS, the Know as a Service group. Because if you're not doing good collaboration, we're not bringing it forward. That's what we do. We fully embrace cloud services. We offer NAS, but there's lots of reasons why that we get that moniker, but that's not for this conversation here today. Yeah, but no, it's good. Yeah, sorry that.
Yeah, no, I was saying, so the language that we choose will change how they interact with us, right? So, and then get outside your comfort zone, right? I mean, I'm sure your feed is like mine, just stuffed with all kinds of great security stuff. But you should go pick up Harvard Business Review. You should go pick up MIT Sloan Management. You're Canadian. You should pick up Rotman, right? Rotman magazine, right? And just get kind of just familiar, because magazines and blogs are easy to read. And then stay in tune with the company and say, oh, hey, that was really cool that we talked about innovation. What does that mean for your department, Jonathan? And just listen, to hear how that impacts what that leader is doing. And then you can tie into those efforts.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I agree. It's pushing our knowledge in the comfort zone. Like you said, it's great to do it. We need to do that, because otherwise we just end up, we're driving with the blinders on. Like when you have the horse race, we can't get distracted by anything else. We need to be broader in what we're looking at, because that's how we ultimately end up succeeding as an individual, as well as the organization ends up getting success and moving forward, when we're all doing that, being a little bit more proactively checking and understanding and trying to continue to develop and move it out there for everybody.
Well, and you and I talked about my analogy of getting to the adult table, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm the youngest of my entire generation of however many cousins I have, 13, I think 14. And when I finally got to the adult table, I was like, yeah, I finally made it to the adult table. The adult table conversation was different than the kid table conversation, because I came from a farming community and farming families, and all of a sudden we're talking about soybean prices and what this tax rate is going to mean to our family livelihood. And also I was like, ooh, this is a different conversation. And my point there simply is we digital transformation and unfortunately the pandemic has accelerated the importance of cybersecurity, right? So you had that project that you thought was going to take 3 or 4 years, that got accelerated, right, to about 30 days, in some cases, right? Everybody's working from home, yay! And so the never waste a good crisis. Part of that is, okay, you have an opportunity. We've elbowed our way up to the adult table. Now it's incumbent on us to speak their language, to know what's happening. You need to know what the earnings per share are. You need to know where the company is. Are we leaning towards OpEx or CapEx? Like these big things. And depending on where you are in the org, then go talk to your boss or your peers and get an understanding of that, because it's incumbent on us to be able to speak in that language, or we're going to lose that opportunity. And so that's kind of my wrap up thought is that we should be focusing on that to make sure we made it, guys. We made it up here to the table. Let's make sure that we bring the right conversation.
No, I agree with that. We are at the adult table, but it's definitely got a lot more color than the kids table. I will. That's there for that. So, anyways,
so Jonathan, there's a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to hit any of those.
All right. Sorry, I didn't see what we had them coming in here. I know there was a little bit of a technical problem going on there at the start, so I apologize for folks that may not have had their questions come in. I know I'll pop into the LinkedIn and other channels afterwards just to see what was in there. I saw there was something technically going on, but we weren't going to stop our conversation. So, what do we have in here now?
I think just some comments.
General ones in here. I guess one thing that'll be interesting is, I know we have some of the folks that are out here that work, it's not for the public companies. It's either, private, it can be a little different but a lot of the info is still going to be available. But also for the, I work for government as an example. I don't have to file a 10K. What is the strategic vision can be entertaining sometimes to find out. So there's some questions that are somewhat along those lines of how do you find some of this stuff out where I don't have the public resources necessarily available?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that one?
I do. And I would go back to those, and I'm happy to publish these out because they're not, I've put them out many times. But if you go back to those 5 initiatives, right? Because again, they're just categories. I've helped some folks ask the question in that way. Hey, is it which of these would you say it is? And so if you say to, again, if you're a smaller entity or you're private, you're right, it's not going to be publicly available, but I can assure you the leaders have those, they have those, they maybe just haven't published them, right? So you can ask those questions around, hey, are we more focused on speed to market? Is it reduced friction? Is it improving customer experience? And again, those are kind of just categories. And if you go through those, what I can assure you is people will respond, oh yeah, we're really focused on world-class customer experience moving forward. Or actually, you know what? We think reducing friction is really critical to our success. Or maybe it's innovation. I've had, younger companies or new companies, but innovation and flexibility, right? And so those categories, you can prep it kind of that way and go, hey, I know these are categories that are common. Which of these is the one? And they'll have answers for you, right? It just won't be published, but you can get to those answers. And then they'll also hopefully reframe their thoughts on, oh gosh, Jonathan asked me some really good questions there around where are we headed and how do we interact with our customers and what's important. And it should lead to more collaboration and more buy-in. So you won't be able to go read those, but you can ask those questions. And I see a question around how do you demonstrate business value or measure success? There's a whole series of things. I'm pausing, you're laughing too, right? Because that's a pretty deep topic, right? But you can use a BIA, you can do an analysis, right? There's a bunch of different ways of demonstrating that. Most of them, to my earlier comment, lean towards risk mitigation, because that's a little bit more tangible for folks. And we can argue for days around FAIR and around the 5x5 and ways to do that, Pookie, to your question. But you can absolutely do that. And I'm happy to give you resources around how to do that. But I'll give you a couple of quick ones. Alan Alford, who's a great CISO, speaks about this frequently. Matthew Sharp and Rock Lambros have spoken about that in their new book. So there's absolutely ways that you can help do that. But it starts with asking those questions, right? You need to ask those questions to understand which of the five or the two of the five that it is. You can absolutely build out a case to help you measure that success.
Yeah. And I think it also ties back to the conversation. It's understanding what what are the things that are important to the business for our area of responsibility. I can't control everything. I'm the frontline manager of, I'll pick on vulnerability management because, hey, I'm biased. But I've got to at least show how is this helping support things, and then you can demonstrate how this is bringing value. Maybe you can provide measurements on how things are being remediation, or as new products are coming out, how we're actually reducing. Like there's lots that we can maybe work on here, but it's stay inside where you are to show the value. And it may only be able to be identified as one item if you're a frontline group, two people inside of it. But still, it's how can you tie that back to the corporate direction, the corporate strategic goals, any of the items that we're working on corporately, showing, hey, this is my 10-cent contribution to it for the whole dollar that we need to make it all up. So it's being able to tie it in that way of this, and we aren't going to be delivering everything. We are not running the organization, but how is our component helping that? Like I said, the contribution that we're making to deliver it, to bring it forward and highlighting that out. And it's not easy in some cases. Like, how do I show that we're decreasing the customer or improving customer satisfaction, or how are we helping drive the cost? Well, I can actually show probably the cost, getting the cash flow in there easier. Yeah, stop the CapEx spending, but still
and I guess because I don't want to leave Pookie without any kind of an answer, right? So what I would say is, depending on where you are, it's a combination of qualitative and quantitative, right? Yeah. And we tend to trend towards quantitative, right? And so I won't pick up, it doesn't matter. There's software tools. There's great resources from the federal government, because of course they publish that. And there's great resources out there around the quantitative metrics, right? But what you're trying to do is show progress, okay? Because it's not binary. It's not we're secure or we're not secure. It's not a yes or no. And you may need to communicate that to business leaders to say security is always a continuum, right? And so what you're trying to show is progress, right? You're trying to show the maturity of your organization, the maturity of your team, and the maturity of the security practice is continuing to improve, right? So you want that trend line to be moving in the right direction. The quantitative metrics support those, to your point, Jonathan, right? So you can look at a variety of metrics to say, we had X amount of potential incidences, we had that translated to incidents of concerns or IOCs, or whichever model you want to use. And then, hopefully that breach number is 0, right? I mean, but you're trying to show progress in the right direction. So there's a bunch of tools that we can point you to on that one.
So no, that's great. Anyways, Dutch, I think we're going to wrap things up here. We
Sounds
are
good.
a little bit past the half past, but regardless, first of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Dutch, for coming on here today, sharing your wisdom and expertise. I know I picked up even a few points today as well, just from listening to you. Like, always seem to get stuff, and it's great to have you on here. Now, final thing for everybody, we'll be back with the water cooler next month. Be on March 23rd, and we're also going on in April. Some of the upcoming things, we're going to be talking about socks here. How are we going to have to worry about pulling up our socks or things like this? And we're not just talking about, hey, those little nice things that we all seem to be mismatching these days. But we've got some interesting thing coming up, so pay attention for those. Like I said, coming up March 23rd, April 20th. And thank you all for tuning in today. And thanks again, Dutch, for joining us. Hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks.